You began as a drummer, is that right?
That's right. I started at age 10 in the school band. You know, we would march at football games and do parades and things like that. And I didn't take up guitar till age 16 when I wanted to be a songwriter. And I got very influenced by the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and people like that. And so I taught myself to play guitar, and it gradually became a better guitarist and more noted as a guitarist than a drummer. I've always been a singer, so that kind of went hand in hand the whole time.
Have you ever pondered perhaps how your career may have panned out had you kept the drums as your main focus?
Well, I think it would have been difficult because I think really I needed to be able to express myself in songs. And I had loads of ideas, always have, and couldn't figure out how to get those across as a drummer. You know, you had the difficulty of trying to explain your ideas to the guitar players that you would work with. So eventually I decided it's better to do it myself.
Now, an early band you were involved with was an outfit called Sweetheart. Can you tell us?
Yes, that's right. That was a band from here in Nashville. It was a band that was really quite well known locally. And had the advantage of looking distinctive. We wore vintage clothing, 1940s gangster-looking suits, you know, with fedora hats and ties and the whole thing. The band looked good and sounded good. It's the band that Frank Zappa walked in on one night after he had played a concert. He wanted something to do, so he asked his chauffeur where to go. His chauffeur took him to the club we were playing at because we were his favorite band. Frank Zappa watched me play and sing for about 40 minutes and then got my name and number from the chauffeur and later called me and auditioned me.
That was your initial meeting with Frank?
That's it. Yeah, he shook my hand at the end of the 40 minutes. I remember we were playing Gimme Shelter by the Rolling Stones.
Must have been an exciting time, an exciting period playing alongside Frank Zappa.
It was incredible. It was for me. It was like finally getting my education in every way, because Frank could impart to you on a daily basis all kinds of information about every level of being a professional musician. He took me through the process of making records. We even made a film together. Of course, we toured through the United States and Europe, and that gave me a lot of information. But what was most fascinating for me was Frank the man, the person, because he was brilliant and very hilarious, and I got to be pretty close to him for a year, and it was interesting to see how he worked.
What kind of a band leader was he? Was he a hard taskmaster?
Yes, he was. He really wanted you to play his music consistently and correctly, and he demanded long hours. He was really probably the hardest working musician I've known. But, you know, at that stage in my life, I welcomed that. I really liked it. And Frank was very generous, and you know, even though people don't think of him this way, he was actually a very nice person to the people that he liked. He could be very sarcastic and sardonic to the critics and to other people, but to the people he worked with, he really treated me well. He was just very fun to be around. I have my own home movie in my head of all his expressions and his things he said and the way he held his cigarette, and it's priceless to me.
Now, not long after you were working with Frank, you moved on and toured with Talking Heads for a while.
For 1 year.
Yeah, that also must have been an exciting experience, playing large stadium shows and whatever. Did they describe to you the role that they wanted you to play within the band?
Well, it was the same thing that happened with the thing that happened after Frank Zappa was David Bowie for a year.
Mm-hmm, of course. And
David Bowie led to Talking Heads. In both of those cases, I was given carte blanche to play whatever I wanted to play. And I was brought into Bowie's band and Talking Heads band really as someone who would play a lot of guitar solos and make a lot of interesting sounds and be sort of a colorist, someone who could take over some of the sounds and things that were made in the studio but couldn't be done live. So my role was wide open. I really enjoyed that. Whereas in Frank's band, it was all prescribed to you what you were supposed to play. In both the Bowie band and Talking Heads band, I was sort of set free, and I think that made a big leap for me in my guitar playing.
Over the years, while always working with others, you've still remained active with your own music. Do you always feel that strong need to have that involvement outside, other than just being part of someone else's band?
Well, of course, what I started to do from the very beginning, I always imagined myself as a recording artist who would do his own work, either in the structure of a band or making solo albums or somehow. I never really envisioned myself being a part of other people's music. That was a happy accident, and it's continued over the years, all the way up until recently. Even I'm still playing other people's records. I just have finished doing the 9 Inch Nails record that'll come out soon, for instance. But I think there's a balance there that keeps my music healthy. It's good for me to play with other musicians. It's good for me to be involved with other people and see how they do what they do. It's educational. I make new friends. I learn things. But I would have to say, of course, that takes a back seat to the music that I try to do of my own, because that's my personal vision of music, and that's what's most important to me, and what takes up most of my time is being in my studio and doing solo albums.
You recall that initial feeling when you finally got down to recording your first solo work? Were you anxious to enjoy that freedom of creating your own music?
You know, I had so many ideas backed up that I didn't really know where to start. So the first album that I did is called The Lone Rhino, and if you listen to that record now, you see that it goes in a variety of directions. Well, that's because I hadn't really settled into any one or two particular styles. In that same time period, I made, this very same year, I made the Tom Tom Club album, which was some of the members of the Talking Heads, and I made also the first King Crimson album, which was called Discipline. So it was certainly a year in which a lot of ideas came to fruition, and I had sort of an explosive creative period there.
When Robert Fripp approached you to join what would become King Crimson, was that the type of role you were looking for at that particular time?
I was really thinking hard about being in a band, but I didn't know what band. I thought at that point that I might end up being in the band called Talking Heads, who I was playing with at that time. But the role was never really offered me, and I could see that with David Byrne in the position he was in, it would be difficult to have sort of two people doing the songwriting and singing. So when the offer came from King Crimson to be the main songwriter and singer, as well as, of course, all the other roles that came with it, being guitar partner to Robert Fripp and playing with Tony Levin and Bill Bruford, of course it was very exciting to me. My main concern was, however, that I would still be able to do my solo records, and as it turned out, the band was slated to work on and off, sort of half a year at a time, so that would leave me enough time to do other projects. So it worked out beautifully.
Were you a fan of the original King Crimson?
I was a big fan of the original King Crimson, all of its incarnations, from the Court of the Crimson King through the last album, Red. I loved all that music and knew that music very, very well, which is something I think that impressed Robert Fripp, because when we first met as friends, and I let him know that, then I think he realized that maybe I could be instrumental in help creating the next level of King Crimson.
And how was that feeling getting back with King Crimson again in '95?
It felt really good. I was ready for it. I mean, it had been a very long pause, and I kept hearing rumors that there might be a King Crimson, and so I finally went to England and went to Robert's house and approached him about it and said, if there is going to be a new King Crimson, I'd like to be in it. And I think that sort of got his wheels turning and cemented the idea that it was time to have another King Crimson. Things have, of course, slowed down in the world of King Crimson itself while we've done these other things called Project 1, Project 2, and so on. There's going to be one called Project 4 coming up in the fall. But it's all leading towards having the next generation of King Crimson music.
How do you feel about labels being placed upon your music? I've seen you described as an experimental guitarist. Do you think labels like that sit okay with you?
Well, they're incomplete. Any label would be probably incomplete for most artists. But I think they're necessary in a way to direct the listener to what the music is. I have made some music which I would consider to be experimental. I've also made some music which I consider to be pop music, and even some things that are somewhere in between. And of course, guitar playing is not even all that I do. I'm a producer, I'm a songwriter, I'm a drummer, a singer, a multi-instrumentalist. I try to do a lot of things. So it would be difficult to describe everything I do. I think the hardest thing is to describe the sound of the music. No one has ever really given it a description that I like. I mean, what do you call King Crimson music? I don't know. It's, if you say progressive rock, that describes an earlier version of King Crimson music. It doesn't describe what we do now.
No, it's indescribable, really. You've worked. One thing that really impresses me about you, and always has, is that you've been able to slot in and adapt with people from a wide variety of musical backgrounds, no matter who you've worked with and what musical style it is. You seem to slot in no problem and adapt. Is that something you've had to work at, or does that seem to come naturally to you?
No, I think it comes naturally to me. I think it's partly my personality. I'm easy to get along with. I'm flexible. I have my own very distinctive ideas about something, but I save those for when I'm doing my own records and I'm in control. So if I'm working with someone else in a collaboration or even as a sideman, I'm able to put aside my feelings and listen to their instruction and try to give them what they want. And usually I have a number of ideas to offer up. I think musically it's the same thing. I'm very flexible. I remember there was a short period of time a few years ago when I played. One week I played on Paul Simon's record, and the next week I played on the Nine Inch Nails record called Downward Spiral. Now you can't really get much different in those two experiences.
That is a contrast.
And I think the thing was I got along with those people, and maybe it's because they obviously come to me because they like something I do. So they already have a certain amount of respect for my ability. And most of those cases, they ask me to offer up ideas and kind of just give me free rein. So it's not as difficult as you might imagine.
I was going to ask you about the Paul Simon sessions. You played on Graceland. How did that one come about?
It came about through a back door, really. I'd played with Laurie Anderson. Her saxophone player, Dickie Landry, was a good friend of Paul Simon's. I'd given Dickie Landry some of my new music, which had a lot of interesting guitar synthesizer sounds, which intrigued Paul. And that's why he called me. He wanted me to put in some little other flavors that didn't come with the African players that he had as the basis for that record. So when I came in, I heard the record the first time, there were no vocals, and it was just this African music that didn't sound at all like anything from Paul Simon. And I said, Paul, I don't quite understand what you're doing here. And he said, well, let me show you. I'm going to sing you some of the ideas that I have. So he would play the tracks and sing gently into my ear, and it kind of gave me chills. And then it really, of course, really sounded like Paul Simon. Yeah. So I only spent 4 days on that record, but it was a really nice experience, amazing record, I thought. And, of course, it went on to do extremely well.
You've always given the impression also that you don't like to stand still musically for too long. Do you get restless if you're tied down to the one thing for too long?
I don't think it's getting restless. I think it's it's more to do with that I have so many areas I like to work in. If you were here, a fly on the wall, say, watching me every day in my studio, at one point I'd be playing drums, and then I'd go over and play electronic V drums, and then I'd play something like a pop song I'm working on, and then I'd be playing some very strange guitar sounds that I'm working on. It's a constant renewal experience for me, and I work in so many different areas. It's just that's what I like. I don't like to be in any one particular mode, but it's not because I'm restless. I think it's because I enjoy it all. I like all of it. It's the whole experience to me that matters the most.
Now, tell us a bit about the Bears. Well, I'll be right in assuming that was one of your most enjoyable projects?
Well, the Bears is made up of old friends of mine who had played together for years. I'd watched them grow as a band. They were called the Raisins at that time. Eventually, when I decided after the first King Crimson folded in the 80s, I decided, well, it's time to have another band. I drew on my friends, the Bears, Rob Fetters, Bob Neiswanger, and Chris Arducer, because, as I said, we had a certain chemistry, being friends, and they were all three very good songwriters. And I thought, well, this is interesting. You could put together a band where everyone can mix and match their songs, and you'd have a lot of material to work from. And the basis from the band was to really try and do a sort of world-class pop band. It worked really well. It was a great band. Just ran out of funding somewhere in the late 80s, and couldn't subsist on just touring alone, because we didn't want to just do that all the time. Now, as it turns out, recently I started the Bears again. We've got 8 new songs recorded. We're on our way to making another record.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it sounds great, too. And Robert Fripp played on one of the songs, too, so he's now an honorary Bear.
You're a real studio hound. Do you relish that studio environment?
That's my favorite place to be. That's why about 5 years ago I decided to really make a big investment and put together my own studio that's connected to my home. All my life, I suppose, I think that the place I always wanted to be the most was in the studio, because that's where the creativity starts, and that's where there's this sort of magic that occurs where you go in and you have nothing, and out of thin air you start making something happen, and pretty soon you have a piece of music or a song, and you can play it over and over again. That entire process and the working through whatever problems you may occur in that process, that's what has always been the whole magic for me. I love performing in front of people, but I suppose my favorite thing is that creative time where you're sitting and trying to work things out, which is exactly what I'm doing these days. Now that I've finished my touring with Project 2, I've begun a whole new area of music for a new solo album, of course.
Now, you've also doubled in production over the years. As a producer, have you found it an advantage having also been a musician in terms of understanding the needs of the musicians you're working with?
Absolutely, yeah. I think a lot of times with musicians, they don't know how to express things. A lot of musicians speak in very abstract terms. I'd like this to sound more purple, and being a musician, you can understand where that's coming from, and you have a lot more sort of road signs to refer to. A lot of other musicians, well, make it sound a little bit like this and something like that. What I try to do with my productions really is bring out whatever it is the artist or band is trying to accomplish without coloring it too much my own way. But of course, I always find that I bring my own experience to it. And the people I generally work with know a lot of the things I've done, so it's good. They can talk to me on that level and say, well, how did you do this and how did we do that? And I really enjoy producing because I think I have a natural ability for it. Even from when I was a child, I used to listen to records with an ear towards why did they do this and why did they do that and why do they have that sound on the drums and why do they have that harmony. And so I've always, in a sense, studied records, and that's probably how I've gotten to the point that I am where I can produce people.
What would you regard as the key element to a good production?
I would say really it's being in control of it, not letting it escape the original goals. So, you really have to be there. It's almost like a film director. You have a lot of different people doing things, and you have to organize it, and you have to make sure that the film is still in focus the same exact way that you said it was going to be. Of course, what happens in the making of a record is things occur, and things change, and accidents happen, and you have to allow for that. But overall, you're trying to paint a certain picture, and you know what it's supposed to be, and if you can achieve that, that's the goal.
It feels somewhat that advancements in recording technology have somehow taken some of the heart and soul out of the recorded performance?
I don't feel that way. I know there are people who feel that way. I have no problem with all of the technology. I'm a real klutz at it, to tell you the truth. I'm not good with computers and things like that, but I utilize them from an artist's viewpoint. They're just like another set of paintbrushes. I always have to have someone telling me, here's what I want to do, and they'll achieve it for me. But I'm not afraid of technology, and I don't shy away from it. I embrace it. But I do realize there are some people who say that some artists get too drowned in it, and then they lose sight of really the music itself. I'm always very careful about that. I always try to balance between synthesizers and real instruments, and between digital workstations and tape, analog tape.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a balance there you can achieve, and if you're smart about it, it doesn't take anything away from the music. I think what some people are sensing overall is that there are so many people making music that if there is anything that's diluting music today for my ears, it's the fact that there's too many people trying to do the same things.
Uh-huh. Now, regardless of the technology, how else have you differed your approach to recording over the years? You tackle a project any differently?
Well, I think having my own studio has changed my approach, because it's given me the opportunity to experiment more and try whatever I want without worrying about it. I love being in other studios, but there is this aspect about it that you're spending a lot of money doing that, and you have to be careful and watch the clock and things. Having my own studio, I've come at it from a different angle now. The whole idea for me is just try things, and try and accomplish something every day. It accumulates, and pretty soon you've got 4 or 5 records going, which is how it works for me now. So rather than be worried about how much time you're spending, you can really enjoy the time you're spending. And if it takes an hour to get a certain drum sound that you're looking for, that's not a problem anymore. I suppose the other thing that's really changed is just my knowledge of what you can do in a studio nowadays, and what the technology is, and trying all the different technologies. It's still very important to me to have the right people with you. I've always tried to have a really good recording engineer, which I always do. So there's my link to all of it.
Now, you mentioned the Project 2 concert tour that you just returned from. Can you just tell us a little bit about that, who was involved, and the material you were covering?
Project 2 was, and still is, Robert Fripp, Trey Gunn, and myself. Now, it's a bit of a different style band, even though it's half of King Crimson, because what occurred is Robert and Trey came here to my studio ostensibly to continue writing new King Crimson material. At the same time, I had just received this new drum kit called V-Drums. And V-Drums are the next generation of electronic drums in which you can create your own sounds, any sound really, and play it as a drum kit. So they don't have to sound like snare drums and tom-toms and cymbals. They can sound like doors slamming and steam and backwards things and anything you want, basically. So I was showing Robert and Trey this new technology, and it's really pretty amazing when you hear it. And I was drumming and showing them some of this stuff when they joined in and started playing along with it. After that, for about 20 minutes of improvising, which had been recorded, of course, my engineer's always recording everything, they turned to me and said, gee, this is really interesting. Why don't we continue doing this with you as the drummer? And that's how the band began. Within 3 days' time, we had improvised our first double CD. So that's how Project 2 came about. I'm explaining that long story to show you that it was kind of an accident, and that I ended up being the V drummer the electronic drummer for that trio. Then we went out and played a lot of dates. We played all throughout America, Canada, Japan, and England. And the band really changed and metamorphosized and turned into kind of a junior King Crimson, I call it. And everyone got much better at what they were doing, and it was really a lot of fun. Still, the music was all improvised, and it stayed that way throughout all those concerts, which was interesting, to walk out on stage and not even have a song list. So the band has just finished its touring for the year, but I think what occurred with Project 2 is I think we accomplished the building blocks for the next generation of King Crimson material. So some of these ideas that we improvised have now been more formalized, and we'll turn them into pieces of music.
Do you try and distance yourself from the business side of the music scene? I mean, for example, how have you got on with record companies over the years?
I've gotten on pretty well with record labels. Everybody has a story or two to tell, probably, about things they wish it had gone differently. The thing you have to understand about a record label is that you can't be their priority all the time. They can only give you so much time and money behind each of your projects, and depending on how well that's worked out, they're going to either continue putting money and time into it, or they're going to stop. So that's the way it's gone in my career. I don't feel I've ever really gotten the big push that I'd love to have had that some artists get, but that's okay. Maybe I don't deserve it. Maybe it's just a matter of luck or clout or timing or who knows what. Yeah. Overall, though, I've gotten on with record labels pretty well, and I've had very good business relationships over the years. I've got a very good manager who's been my manager for, believe this or not, more than 20 years.
Wow.
And that's, in the music business, is pretty remarkable.
And pretty rare.
He's very rare, yeah. Stan Hertzman is his name. He's not only one of my best friends, but I consider him sort of a mentor, because over the years he's taught me everything I need to know about things like publishing and, all the different business ends of it. And for some artists, it's a bit unsavory to even talk about that stuff or know about it, but I feel that you need to be enlightened about it. And overall, we've done well. I mean, I'm still here. I'm making records, and I've never actually had a hit record, and that's kind of interesting, to still be here making records and doing well and having so many projects going on. Is the kind of career that I never envisioned, but really is the kind of career that's the smartest, I think. Mm-hmm. The curve of my career, instead of going straight up and straight back down like some people, it's been one of those careers that's long-lasting, and I can envision myself now making music, hopefully for the rest of my life, which is what I want to do.
Fantastic. We look forward to that too. Now, you mentioned you've got a couple of projects in the works at the moment, another Bears album and a solo work as well. What sort of time frame are we looking at there when they're out and about?
Well, we hope to finish the Bears record coming into this fall. So I would hope it'd come out next year, early next year. And the same is true with the solo record. What I'm going to do for the rest of this year is concentrate on those two things and a few other things. There will also be some more meetings with Robert and the guys from King Crimson to continue the writing and the formulating of music. So I would think that next year you would see early on a Bears album, a new Adrian album, and then later in the year, hopefully, you'll start to see the signs of new King Crimson material. So it's a very fertile time. A lot of things going on. As
busy as ever, yeah. That's great. Look, Adrian, I won't hold you up any longer. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Sure, my pleasure.
It's been a real.
I really wish I could come to Australia sometime. I had a great time there.
Oh, look, we'd love to see you. We would really love to see you.
The next time the King Crimson gets together, I'm going to urge them to see if there's any possible way that we could do that. That would be really spectacular.
Oh, that'd be a real treat.
So thanks for calling.
Fantastic. You take care, and we look forward to the new material.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Adrian. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.